What if everything you've been told about national debt is a lie? What if countries don't actually have to repay the trillions they borrow? What if, behind the headlines of debt crises and bailouts, there is a secret financial loophole that allows nations to borrow endlessly, while ordinary citizens struggle under the weight of their own loans? This isn't speculation, it's the hidden structure of the global financial system. And it's been quietly operating for centuries. By the end of this video, you'll see why the debt you thought was inevitable isn't really meant to be repaid at all. To understand this loophole, we need to go back in time. For centuries, lending and borrowing were personal or local. Kings borrowed from wealthy merchants, farmers borrowed from neighbors, and failure to repay often meant imprisonment or loss of property. Debt was tangible, a moral, social, and economic obligation. The first shift occurred in the 17th century, with the creation of government bonds. England, preparing for wars and empire building, began borrowing from financiers, promising repayment over decades. But here's the twist: the debt could be traded, sold, and bundled, meaning lenders could profit endlessly, regardless of whether the government ever repaid the principal. This is the first seed of the loophole. If debt can be bought, sold, and leveraged, repayment becomes optional. The real profit comes from interest, fees, and financial instruments built on top of the debt itself. The system was clever. Governments could raise massive sums for wars and infrastructure without immediate taxation. Bankers could profit regardless of repayment. And ordinary citizens, far removed from the deals, would eventually shoulder the economic consequences. Fast forward to the 20th century, governments needed more money than ever. World wars, industrialization, and social programs required unprecedented funding. Borrowing directly from citizens or gold reserves wasn't enough. Enter central banks, international lending institutions like the IMF, and global bond markets. Here, the loophole was institutionalized. Governments issued debt in the form of bonds. Central banks or international institutions buy the bonds, sometimes monetizing them. Interest payments are scheduled far into the future, often exceeding the nation's annual budget. Debt can be rolled over indefinitely, issuing new bonds to pay off old interest. In other words, nations can technically never fully repay their debt. They just refinance, restructure, or print new money to service it. The illusion of repayment is maintained, but the core debt continues to exist, often growing year after year. One of the most striking examples of this occurred after World War II. European countries owed massive sums to the United States. Yet through careful restructuring and agreements like the Marshall Plan, most nations paid only a fraction of what they owed in real terms, and the rest was effectively forgiven. The loophole isn't a mistake, it's a feature, a system designed to allow governments to borrow endlessly without collapsing financially. The global debt system has limits, though. By the 1970s, debt levels were rising faster than economies could grow. Inflation, interest rates, and political pressures combined to create crises. The US dollar's detachment from gold in 1971 was pivotal. Suddenly, countries could borrow in fiat currency, money that exists only as a promise backed by government authority. Repayment became even less relevant. Nations could service debt by printing money, refinancing, or receiving favorable restructuring deals. Yet this also created vulnerabilities. Countries that overborrowed without sufficient growth faced debt crises in the 1980s and 1990s, Latin America, Asia, and Eastern Europe. But here's the key insight: even in crises, the loophole persists. Sovereign debt is rarely defaulted in the strictest sense. Instead, loans are restructured, interest is reduced, or partial forgiveness occurs, meaning full repayment is almost never required. The system absorbs shocks without collapsing, ensuring lenders still profit while governments remain dependent. If nations rarely repay debt, who bears the cost? Ordinary citizens. Inflation erodes savings, taxes increase. Social programs are cut to meet interest payments. Public services are privatized to generate revenue. Meanwhile, financial institutions, hedge funds, and central banks profit from interest, fees, and currency fluctuations. Consider Greece during the European debt crisis. Trillions in loans were issued, but repayment schedules and restructuring deals meant the actual loss to creditors was limited. The public faced austerity, unemployment, and economic stagnation, but the system's core players remained insulated. The loophole ensures that risk is socialized while profits are privatized. Nations borrow endlessly, debt grows, economies appear unstable. Yet collapse is avoided because the system is designed to rotate responsibility away from lenders. Politicians often promise balanced budgets or debt reduction, but these measures rarely succeed. Here's why. Debt grows faster than GDP. Even if spending is cut, interest accrues faster than national income. Borrowing is necessary to fund essential services. Cutting debt abruptly would trigger recessions or political unrest. Global financial systems depend on debt cycles. Bonds, interest payments, and derivatives are interconnected. Reducing debt in one nation can destabilize markets worldwide. In essence, the system cannot fully repay debt without collapsing. Attempts to do so fail because the loophole is baked into global finance. Borrowing can continue indefinitely, repayment is optional, and the cost is transferred to ordinary people. Today, the system continues. U.S. national debt exceeds $35 trillion, yet the government continues borrowing daily. Japan's debt is over 250% of GDP, yet interest payments remain manageable due to central bank policies. Eurozone countries borrow continuously, with IMF and ECB interventions preventing defaults. Emerging economies restructure or refinance debt repeatedly, rarely paying the full principal. The pattern repeats globally. Nations borrow, crises emerge, loans are restructured, and debt persists, almost never fully repaid. The system is cyclical, stable, and profitable for the financial elite, while ordinary citizens carry the real cost. Takeaway 1. National debt is rarely meant to be repaid in full. Loopholes like refinancing, restructuring, and monetary expansion make endless borrowing possible. Takeaway 2. Financial crises are built into the system. They ensure nations remain dependent on lenders while allowing institutions to profit continually. Takeaway 3. Ordinary citizens pay the invisible cost through taxes, inflation, austerity, and reduced services, while the system preserves itself and its profits. If the global debt system is engineered to avoid repayment, the next question isn't how nations can pay, but who really decides the rules. As long as debt is a tool of control, stability depends not on economic growth, but on confidence in a system designed to profit from perpetual borrowing. When confidence falters, crises erupt, but the loophole ensures repayment is optional, the system survives, and ordinary people are left to absorb the cost. If you want to uncover more hidden truths about money, debt, and the global financial system, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who still believes national debt is like household debt. The story of money is far more complicated and powerful than we've been taught.